Hey everybody, welcome to Rainer Radio. It's been a long time. I'm your host, Joshua Rainer. Today is my guest, William Wheelwright, the philosopher plowman, as I like to call him. If anyone's heard the song Closer to the Heart by Rush, you'll get the reference. William, welcome.
Thanks, Joshua. Pleasure to be here.
We are back in so many ways.
We're back.
Um,
We're
yeah,
definitely back.
first episode in over a year for me. America is back. Trump is back. So there's a lot going on in the first not even week, and there's already stuff to talk about as far as, I guess, things that we would like to be seen done better.
Mhm.
And so if anyone saw the recent appointments um, in the agriculture world, I thought our favorite farmer, William, would be the perfect person to talk to about this. So um, yeah, we have our deputy chief of staff for the USDA, who is a seed oil shill, and then um, who the Secretary of Agriculture. You know, people have probably seen that post going around about factory farm pigs and stuff. So yeah, we kind of want to go over what I mean, how can it be done better, right? Have my brief experience as a farmer. Willem, you have a lot more. So let's start off with pigs. um, you know, as far as pigs go, they were always the hardest, I felt like, to deal with because of just how, uh, you know, short and low to the ground they are and how strong they are. So, William, how do you raise your pigs?
Well, we raise them in the woods. We rotate them through. Most of the farm is actually forest, and I think that's the case for um, a lot of farms, at least east of the Mississippi. And so, really, the pigs are a way to increase the value of that acreage without, drastic intervention. And more recently, what we've actually been doing, as is the case with a lot of land all across America, a lot of our ash trees are dying, and ash is a very common species, and because of various pressures, invasive species, and uh, deer populations, a lot of times the native forestry species, aren't coming in to replace the dying ash. And so what we've been doing on our property is uh, taking pigs and trying to develop a strategy to kind of convert that sort of more thin forest that has fewer living trees in it, less leaf cover, less shade, so more sunlight hitting the ground, and converting them into silvopasture, which just means forest landscape with grass growing on the forest floor. And so really kind of like a 25% or so shade cover, um, in terms of the sort of tree level, and then basically pasture, grass, herbivore ready grass below that. And we found that pigs are very effective in making that conversion happen. In if we were to just leave it alone, what would happen, at least where we are, is that kind of there would be a lot of dead standing trees, some trees that are remaining, that are alive, that aren't ash trees, obviously, but then just invasive shrubs, so autumn olive, barberry, Japanese wineberry, these sorts of opportunistic shrubs, from most of them from the Asian continent. Would take over, and those just don't have that much value ecologically or agriculturally. And so pigs are a great way to keep, if those are already present, to root them out, to at least make it easier to remove them by hand or with machines, and also to prepare the ground. And you have to be careful about how you do this, but if you do it in the right way, you can really use them as seed drills, essentially. like a seed drill on the, as a tractor implement, but instead of with a machine, you're using the impact of swine on the land to get seeds into the ground, get them with sufficient soil contact to actually germinate. If you just go out and scatter grass seed on the ground, unless you get really lucky, it's probably not going to germinate. Especially, and getting lucky would just mean getting the right amount of rainfall. But still, even with that, and especially in a lot of these forested areas in the eastern U.S., a lot of it is really just rather barren soil, rather bad land. A lot of it in the hillier landscapes, and that's just because it was even in the steepest areas, a lot of it was plowed. Interesting fact about mules is that, and why they were preferred, is that they can walk, unlike horses and donkeys, they can walk perpendicular to the slope, and basically enable you to plow even the steepest slopes. And they did that in a long time ago, in the 18th century, around in Revolutionary War era, and after that, all over the eastern U.S. And obviously, just the effects of erosion, on the steeper the slope is, the more erosion you're going to have. And the land is just unable to recover from that. And a lot of time it's gotten abandoned. And now that's what our forests are growing in, that soil. And so the reason I bring it up is just that germination it's very difficult to achieve germination on those thinner, eroded soils, just because you need soil contact. And when they're hard pan, and there's not there's not as much organic matter, you're just going to have less likely germination. So pigs are an intervention that enable you to get around that, and we've had great success. And I've posted videos of this, of sort of forest pastures that have been with the grass, where the grass has been planted by pigs, and we're able to later that same year graze it with cattle or sheep, which is really the kind of the cash cow, no pun intended, or literally, because you're just that's the valuable acreage, is where grass is growing, and you can essentially add acres to your farm, acres of grassland to your farm, that can then be converted into beef or lamb or wool or leather or whatever it is you're growing milk. And the other thing that's great is just that, because there are trees in that landscape, obviously you won't be able to make hay on it or something, but you will. The grass goes to seed later, so it remains nutritious for the herbivores for longer, gives you a longer window in which to get onto it, and it just provides shade for the animals. So it's great for the middle of the summer, when it's hot and they need shade. You can put them in those areas. And pigs, without pigs, we wouldn't have been able to do this, or maybe we could have, but it would have required a huge mechanical intervention. So that's how we raise pigs, and we try and integrate them into the whole farm system that way. Obviously, this is small scale, and this is kind of like boutique, premium priced pork and stuff. And so bringing it back to the USDA question and the question of industrial ag, that's a broader conversation, which I'm happy to have as well. But I think I'll leave it at that in terms of answering the first question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, pigs are like nature's terraformers.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a farm that I had friends that ran in Colorado, and when they took over this land, they had just a big patch which was a parking lot, so it just impacted dirt.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing had grown there, and God knows how long, and it was as dry and dead as could be. And in 4 years, they turned that into one of the most lush gardens I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And pigs.
Yeah, totally.
So do you supplement the feed at all with anything, or are they just purely forage pasture?
No, we definitely supplement, just non-GMO, typical feed ration, corn and soy, just because that's the best thing that we have available where I am. I did try, and we have had several different experiments, and this actually comes into I think the bigger point about the sort of food industrial complex. But it's in terms of, not only is corn and soy the cheapest, and maybe in some places you can, if you know somebody who's growing like wheat and peas on a mechanical scale, you can do that. But like the example I want to get to is, we had, coming from far away, many, I think hundreds of miles away, there was like a food processing plant that was, selling to restaurants that was, had these pallet boxes of like carrot peels and just like all kinds of like broccoli stems, stuff like that, because they were making pack ready, like taking raw vegetables and other raw products and um turning them into like slightly more value added for chefs and stuff. So like peeled garlic and peeled onions and chopped whatever, this and that. And that obviously produces a ton of kind of like kitchen waste. And we were getting that by the pallet load for a long time. And, we did sort of analyses on that and found that while it was like nice to do that, it didn't, and we were feeding them that and still grain. It didn't actually change the calculus. And obviously, just like in terms of the calories, they're not herbivores, and they're not, they need like they need just straight up calories. They need carbohydrates to gain weight, and to and eventually become the kind of product people want to buy. I was going to say at the beginning that we did the first batch of pigs I raised, like as an adult when I was 18 or 19. I did try and raise like straight up pastured, like no supplements other than maybe like our home kitchen scraps, and they just didn't they just didn't gain that much weight. They didn't turn out that big, and they were very lean and unpleasant eating at the end of that. And so I think with pigs, there's, if you look at the history of pork production, there's always been some kind of byproduct input. There's, in the 19th century, before refrigerated rail cars, like skim milk went to pigs, because butter, which is shelf stable, was what was the actual like valuable product from dairy. So, or butter was the valuable product, and skim milk was the byproduct that was fed to pigs. And obviously, as you can imagine, they gain like crazy on that. And some people still, there's like the whey. There's this guy in Vermont or New Hampshire who has this crazy setup with whey, and I've actually gotten whey also, but it's like it's so hard to just move around, and you need like a whole setup to create a system where with whey, obviously it's liquid, so it's like
it's very hard to transport liquid.
Yeah, you're going up. I was driving like an hour. I did this maybe 10 times, driving like an hour to go get it. It's with like 55-gallon drums just in the back of the truck, 6 of those, filling it up,
sloshing around.
Yeah, sloshing around. I had lids for them, so like that was okay. But yeah, it's like and they're like chained down into the truck bed. But and then you get back, and you can move it around with tractors and pallets and stuff. But it's just like you compare that to the ease of corn and soy in big feeders, and the price, and the fact that the guy who grows it and mixes it delivers it to you, you just can't compete in terms of like just the cost of that, and the fact that just the benefit, the cost savings I found were basically like insignificant. So that's kind of like the reality of it. I think that like there could one day be and like Joel Salatin I've heard him talk about this kind of like vision for the future of pork production, where there are like waste channels where food waste, obviously some municipalities have like compost and stuff now, but instead of that, you just have it goes straight to like a pig farmer. And obviously there's a brew, or there used to be, it shut down, but there used to be a brewery near me, and the building was like a historic brewery. And out back they had like this old pig pen where they were giving them the spent grain. But all of these things, other like skim milk would be the exception, but all of these things are like kind of like low quality feeds, right?
Right.
And another issue, and this applies to a lot of different forms of livestock, is just the breeding. And older breeds are bred to gain on that kind of thing, but they're very fatty. They're not going to be what people are used to in terms of like pork from the grocery store. So there's a lot of kind of like, market sales, customer adaptations that would need to happen um, for that kind of thing to become possible. So, which, there's nothing that there's people, obviously, a lot of food attitudes have changed, just over the last few years about a lot of things. So that's not impossible, but there's there's more challenges, I think, than people realize when, they see the video of the sad pig in the crate, which obviously is horrible. But they're like, why can't there be a Chris Rufo, as Anna Kachian, my dear friend and lovely person, said, for factory farming. And it's just like, well, it's a lot more deeply entrenched, longer standing and complex system than like DEI, which,
Right.
Rufo, obviously taking nothing away from Chris Rufo, that whole thing, was like, obviously it had been a long time coming, and there was a lot of groundwork laid for it by the international racial communist left, but it had really only like gotten its hands on like concrete, objective levers of power, in the last 15 years or so. So because of that, it was, I think, easier to attack and begin to dismantle, as is now happening. So it's just it's a different kind of problem that has a lot of different kind of stakeholders and factors. So yeah.
Right. So, when we're talking the political, it's about like the practical, right? I think that's an expression. It's like, what can we actually do? And so farming is like a real thing that exists. It exists in the tangible real world. And I honestly, in many ways, it's like, that is kind of a good way to like, I don't know, to very like, simply sort of, divide the left and the right, is like, the right is more focused on what is like in the tangible world, whereas the left is more focused on ideas, kind of, in a way. I mean, that's obviously a very rough, non-exact kind of way of looking at it, but DEI, in a sense, it's like, you can get rid of it. Yeah, the people involved are real, the power structures are real, but if you just wipe it out tomorrow, that's it. Like, there's nothing that needs to be replaced, because it's
Right.
like this fake thing that was constructed. And if anything, it's like, oh, everything just works better now. It's just this weird like thing that was lodged in our side for decades. But farming's very real. Food is real. People need to eat. And so, in this kind of new version of what perhaps maybe the right is today, which, thank God, kind of includes this holistic health, regenerative agriculture, natural, healthy, all these kind of elements. It's very easy to kind of then start to leave reality. When you see like these like holistic health accounts, like gonna live on a farm and home birth 10 kids, and we're gonna drink raw milk, and we're gonna read poetry or whatever. And it's like, that's all, but like, how are we actually going to do these things? And so it's very easy for people to be like, oh, the pigs, just raise them like in this idyllic farm. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't push for that, but we have to be realistic. How do we actually get to that point? What you were saying about just kind of the reality of how you have to feed pigs, that kind of goes across the board for like, I mean, even dairy cows, like what's required calorically for dairy cows, for chickens, for pigs. And a lot, people, it's been said that like, especially the pork and poultry industry are basically just like offshoots of the grain industry.
Basically.
Yeah. Right. And so, with what you're talking about, as far as like how best can we integrate all of our systems, that's kind of what we have to do if we want something better, because those calories need to come from somewhere, and we waste what is it like? We actually waste like more than half of the food. I don't know if it's nationally, globally,
Hmm.
a lot of food gets wasted. And so,
Yeah.
on every farm that I worked on, we were getting food basically from local college or food bank
Hmm.
that basically, hey, this, it's legally, we can't legally sell this because it's expired, but it's totally fine still.
Hmm.
Here, we'll give this to you because it's our trash, and now basically we're providing a service by like picking up their trash for free.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Which
and like,
which you're not. Which there's businesses that do that, and you're not like it's totally uneconomic to do that. Like as just one guy in a pickup truck. Compared, you look at like what actual, because literally that's a great insight that I thought about a lot when I was as I was talking about driving around doing that. Like you are essentially a trash hauler now, and you're not. You should be, and people charge money for what you're doing, and they charge it. Like garbage men charge money to take away people's trash. You're taking away like a restaurant kitchen's trash, or your friend who runs a dairy's trash, um, and like the thought is that you can do that for free because it has some benefit to your business, but it actually it may, but like when you plug that into like other systems, it just doesn't pencil out. Like you look at the scale of a garbage business with the size of trucks that they have, the fleet of trucks that they have, the other considerations. Like it's just, when you think about it in those terms, you start to see why those sorts of things don't really make sense.
yeah, yeah, and like you were saying, like you're talking about like this like boutique pork. I mean, I was working on like really essentially fancy farms in like Boulder, Colorado, right? So
Hmm.
it's like you're talking about an income level of the customer base where they can afford to buy. Where you have to price this food at to get that level of quality is insane.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
people can't afford to eat that way.
Hmm.
And so, like that's really nice. And, it feels really good to be like, oh man, we do this the best way possible. And then people go, yeah, no one can afford to eat that way except for like the richest people in the
Hmm.
country. And so when you're talking about political solutions, you have to do stuff that works for the population. You have to have widespread systems in place. And so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I don't think that we even did any grain for our pigs.
Hmm.
We got plenty of like cafeteria scraps and salad bar stuff, and
Hmm.
the local farm, when they would have like bad, just like the stuff that's too bad to sell, like
Hmm.
corn and squash and all that kind of. I mean, pumpkin, like every fall. I
Yeah.
mean, pumpkin season, we would have a
The pumpkins
mound
are
of
awesome.
pumpkins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's like three
just
days a year though. Yeah.
yeah, it's great, but like that's just not, that's not what works all the time. And yeah, we would give them our skim milk from our pigs. I'm sorry, from the cows. We would give the
Hmm.
skim milk to the chickens as well. The
Hmm.
chickens they roam the entire farm. We didn't do like a chicken tractor follow thing.
Hmm.
So the chickens basically just had access to like all the acreage of the farm. And um we would kind of like we would move their coops slightly
Hmm.
around, like we kind of had like a pinwheel shape farm.
Hmm. Hmm.
um and so just so they could follow along with the cows and the sheep, so that they could pick through their waste and everything, and get
Hmm.
the little bit of we would feed the dairy cows sprouted grains, so we
Hmm.
would sprout them ourselves.
Hmm.
So in the sense, like it's turned to grass, like a three
Yeah.
day sprout. You have a nice long sprout on there.
Sure. Yeah.
And the chickens would then go through the pig pen, and so we did like they were called like compost pigs.
Yeah.
Um, so as opposed to kind of like free foraging, we just had tons and tons of produce
Yeah.
to give them, but like again, not sustainable for the greater population. And so
Yep.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very interested. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, like that was kind of where I ended up. Uh, and we still raised, we kind of like, because of what the sort of innovation that we landed on with pigs in terms of converting the forest acreage to pasture. We still do it that way because that's very valuable as kind of like a service almost. But I kind of I kind of concluded that, um, or I have concluded that, on a national scale, for both, chickens and pigs, these sort of forager, waste product, historically, they're both of those types of animals are waste product receptacles. So like anything that's a an excess byproduct is being fed to those things, and they're converting it into eggs and prosciutto. Uh, the that yeah, like, are you familiar with Carl Hammer, Vermont Compost? Um,
No, I don't think
he,
I've heard of him.
yeah, he has this like amazing kind of grain free chicken system where it's like a not a municipal, but like a commercial composting operation, and that's the heart of the business, where they're producing, they're getting tons of manure and food scraps and other stuff from all over. They're in Montpelier, Vermont, capital of Vermont, and from some radius. And for that system that produces, I don't know how many cubic yards of compost a year, but many. I mean, it's a big operation. They have a flock of like 1,000 birds or something, and are able to produce eggs year round with no grain. Um, and it's really like, if you this guy Carl Hammer, you look him up, he's a classic kind of like Vermont like hippie agrarian intellectual. But a lot of these guys, if you know them, you could tell that either their parents or they were hippies, and they kind of like became sort of like libertarian, if they started a business, which this guy obviously did. And so he has a lot of very amusing and intellectually stimulating videos, on YouTube. But the like, basically my point is just that you those two like food production systems, for them to be sustainable, there's pasture raised poultry, and there's pasture raised, there's like forest slash pasture raised pork that's popularized by Joel Salatin, that a lot of people are doing now. But I think really, like if I were to snap my fingers and create like the ideal food system, it would be more like what Carl Hammer has, these sort of centralized composting facilities that have pigs and chickens in them. Because what the role of those animals in that system is to accelerate the decomposition of the inputs, the food waste inputs, and in so doing, they're able to feed themselves. But you need just like an enormous amount of inputs, and it should really be just in one centralized location. Uh, and in order, it should be something like a composting facility, because otherwise you're just like, unless you want to just sacrifice an area, which I personally don't really endorse under almost any circumstances in agriculture. Um, Unless you want to just sacrifice an area and say this is our pig area, um, and just like let it become a moonscape. You need to be like, there needs to be some material that's absorbing their impact. And so if you have compost and wood chips and whatever else is going into it, I think they import bark, like bark chips, tree bark chips from a sawmill somewhere nearby.
Yeah,
Uh,
we would get wood chips from some local something,
mhm.
and every so often they would come in and just like dump a giant pile of wood chips.
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, we
yeah,
have we get them from our local guys as well, and it's great. I mean, but you just think about the incredible quantity of wood chips that are being, that are just, power lines and stuff like that. The power lines is a little bit iffy, because they're often sprayed. In addition to, they have crews go in and chip them. Um, but so you have to be careful with that. But like every anywhere where there's trees, there's wood chips rotting somewhere. So if you're able to, and oftentimes, the tree doctor companies are paying someone to dump them somewhere. So you can either undercut the competitors as a dump site if you're a farmer, or just take them for free. That's what I was doing, and actually was able to have some tree work done on our place, for that just became friends with those guys, and they gave me nice discounts on things. So, but yeah, I wanted to. You mentioned something a little while ago that I think really is crucial to the point about like what can we do, what's possible, and also like uh, ideals versus reality. I think that, and I've like written this and said it on other podcasts, but the best way to like conceptualize what's wrong with our agriculture right now is just that it's before you even get to like the food system, just the actual agricultural systems and the plant-based systems that really make it go. Because as you said, everything is downstream of corn and soy, basically, in the American food system. Everything is just a recombination, a reamalgamation of corn and soy, and to an increasing degree, vegetable oils of various forms. Most, many of which are just also corn and soy.
Right.
um, but but when you think about, so you said you were talking about the caloric needs, and like one thing that I like to remind people of is like when it comes to grass-fed beef and grass-fed dairy, unless the manager of those systems has a very robust pasture management system and is really focused on grass production, there are very few farms when I like drive in rural areas where you can just look at and see there's not enough production to produce beef. Like not enough grass. There's not enough calories in the landscape per acre.
So I'm sure you've heard there's like an expression that if you raise cattle, you're actually like a grass farmer first and
Yeah,
foremost. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and so the honest people who say grass fed are bringing in hay to supplement
Right.
the grass that's on the land, and the dishonest ones are bringing in hay and also grain, sometimes spent grain, from breweries and stuff. Which, even though it's not very calorically intensive, it does help with rumination, the bovine digestion, um, and so. The you get to the real problem, which is just like thinking about things on a calories production per acre level. And where do calories come from? Photosynthesis. What's photosynthesis? Sunlight and water and air. Obviously, the air there's plenty of, but when it comes to sunlight and water, our agriculture systems, whether it's pasture or corn or soy or annual grain production, or even woody crops like viticulture, grapes or orchards, we are not actually capturing. We are wasting most of the sunlight, most of the photons that land on an acre, and we're wasting most of the rain that falls on an acre. Why is that happening? Because we don't have, unless you have full year-round, chlorophyll coverage of an acre. Some of that is just hitting bare soil or hitting something other than a plant cell, and is being absorbed as heat into bare dirt or whatever. And same thing with water. Rain falls, and it is
So
being.
what you're saying is basically we're treating all of our natural resources the way California treats its water.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, seriously, like and it's not just all of our natural resources. It's the two most important ones, which are sunlight
Sure.
and water.
Yeah.
Uh, and those are the things that create calories. So if we wanted to have, um, before you even got to freeing pigs from cages and stuff, um, these problems are I think an after effect of this kind of the wastefulness of this system, which is that they don't actually harvest the sunlight and the rainwater. And the reason that you can say it is because it's not just like corn and soy agriculture that suffers from that problem. It's also grass-fed beef and grass-fed dairy, where they're not actually able to produce the milk and the beef from the calories available in the pasture on their farm, because there's just not enough grass growing. You need better systems to do that, and we can get into what those may be. But um, we need to think of the system. The primary needs of the system are that it maximize the conversion of sunlight and rainwater into sugar. And if you look at a cornfield, well, first of all, from you know November till May, all of the sunlight that falls on it just hits bare ground. Um, and so, but
That's
on a
just
pasture,
totally lost and wasted.
totally lost in waste. Most of the rainwater, because of lack of organic matter in the soil, is either immediately lost to erosion if there's enough rainfall, or evaporates away because there's no ground cover to prevent it from evaporating. So the actual amount of photosynthesis that's happening as a percentage of the potential that could be happening based on sunlight and rainwater is very little, and we make up for it by using the two most, I guess, like efficient, genetically the most like efficient crops that can still produce something even with that paltry amount of input, and also just by with synthetics. So yeah. Sorry, I'll.
No, you're right. No, well, I mean, look, that's the whole kind of point of all this is that the way we're running all of our systems is to basically force everything to deteriorate and then try to hang on to the things that are so hardy that mean like like corn and soy, which is like you can grow them that just how easy they are to grow compared to maybe other crops. Um, and at some point, like we're gonna like they say, we're running out of topsoil.
Mhm.
um and when I was in like my most hippiest of phases, at least I'm a cyclical person.
Mhm.
And so in my like super hippie raw primal days, I would always say like you're effectively trying to eat the sun,
Mhm.
and all the foods that you consume are in some varying forms a conversion of the sun into different formats that your body is then trying to access this desirable nutrition from.
Mhm.
And so the more that our food becomes removed from its original power source, so to speak, the less that we are actually capturing the sun and absorbing the sun into ourselves. Um,
Mhm.
and it's interesting, like especially with what we've been dealing with in California, where it's like, especially in LA, we're used to having droughts, or at least they tell us that we have droughts,
Mhm.
where we have a certain stretch of years where we really get very little rainfall, and then we get these like massive storms and floods and
Right.
El Nino and El Nina and all of that. So it's weird, like it's just pretty much like feast or famine with
Mhm.
water,
Mhm.
with no system in place to uh, take advantage of the feasting and
Right.
capture all that water. Because the idea that like anything just works in like a perfectly balanced steady stream of influx of resources. I mean, look, we in the most basic sense, we just know that we have seasons, and so you have to make use of each season to get through the
Mhm.
next one. And so we're basically like not harvesting our crops to get through the winter as far as water goes in California.
Yep.
um, and so when you realize that we're actually not short of water at all, we just let it go into the ocean where
Yep.
it mixes with the seawater, and then we can't use it for so many things. And then we'd
Yep.
have to spend how much money to do desalination and
Yep.
whatnot. And so, yeah, sunlight, I mean, look, and water too, everywhere. But it's like the leaves and grass and all that, like those are basically our solar panels.
Yep.
And so you're just having the sunshine hit the concrete on your roof in Phoenix, Arizona, being like, oh man, it's hot in here. Oh well.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's people obviously talk about the wastefulness of the system, like from a food waste perspective, and when you really think about um, the wastefulness, that's a tiny fraction of the total wastefulness, and the primary wastefulness is at that most basic level. Um, so yeah, the reason that this connects back to like the question of factory farming and stuff is just I think that the point is that there there's this unnatural cheapness that gets introduced by policy, uh, and that that obviously I think that the problem that we're going to see with the Trump administration is probably, other than RFK, probably like just a lack of political will to rock the boat agriculturally. And I obviously, hopefully, RFK gets through Congress and stuff, gets confirmed. But still, even if he does, I think that from what I can tell from Trump's rhetoric towards him and other cabinet appointees, I think he wants to keep them like focused on what he's appointed them to do. And there's at least two political angles that are really having that have a big impact in agriculture. One is just food prices. So there's an incentive to keep, and they're competing with each other. These two factors. One is food prices, which is just the desire to keep food prices low. Obviously, that has a big political impact. If that's part of the reason why Biden lost, probably, is just not because of anything agricultural, but because of inflation. Everything costs became so high. That's one thing. So keeping food prices low. There's an incentive to do that, and that obviously gets expressed through these measures, like putting pigs in cages, which is obviously it's about cramming as many pigs into a barn as possible, and the barn is the sort of fixed cost, so spreading that out over as many units of production as possible. That's the kind of thinking, and then also agricultural exports as like a foreign policy thing is another, just classic historically politically important thing. So and the third thing is just like keeping farmers happy. But obviously keeping farmers happy is in competition with those two things, because farmers want higher prices. But those other two things, you want to keep prices low. So it's just a very difficult and complex political question. There's a lot of things beyond agriculture that factor into it, and I think it's going to take. I'm a little bit pessimistic about, like, other than maybe through RFK, about like just the degree to which this is going to be prioritized by the Trump administration. I think that if they did, and I've said this many times, I think that if you did want to do something that would not be like extremely radical, but would help in terms of advancing regenerative agriculture type solutions, and breaking the death grip of king corn on agriculture. It's just to remove any incentives to create biofuels, including and especially ethanol. So and that's just because as long as there's incentives to create ethanol, there's incentives to grow corn, and 40% of the corn crop gets turned into ethanol. And for people who don't know, ethanol is just it's in most gasoline. It's an additive to gasoline. It's basically just moonshine that they put in your car engine. And we do it for several reasons. One is to keep the price of corn low, to create demand for corn. Another has been, historically a desire for energy independence, supposedly, that isn't drilling for oil. So I think drill baby drill, as Trump wants to do, could be coupled with a sort of stepping away from ethanol production, and that when you think about the incredible acreage that is effectively devoted to ethanol production, it's insane. It's millions and millions of acres every year that goes into growing corn to turn into gas, which I think is just, I think everyone can recognize how crazy that is compared to just drilling for oil, and how nonsensical, the fact that we run gas powered machines or diesel powered, but still, petroleum powered machines to grow corn to turn into ethanol. And we transport the ethanol in diesel powered trucks, et cetera, et cetera. It's very silly, and it's clearly a contrived system.
It is really funny to like think about. I'm just like thinking about like through our lifetimes. We're probably roughly the same age, and thinking about all the like trends and things that got popular. There was always this like very like environmental push and recycling, and I remember like when I was in school, some alumni from my school came back and to like show us this biofuel thing that they were working on, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, we're gonna, everything was always like, oh, we're gonna save the planet, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's like, okay, so if we're going to go the biofuel way, you want us to cut down on carbon emissions through gasoline. So we're going to just turn like the whole country into like one big like corn farm, right? And then,
Yeah.
okay, now you're talking about losing all like the biodiversity. And it's like, you have all these like, we almost like super like um, idealistic ways of like like looking at how the world should work, and you realize that they're
Mm-hmm.
all like completely conflicting. You
Mm-hmm.
know, oh, like you know, a PETA type or like a vegan activist might be like, oh, well, we leather's bad
Mm-hmm.
because murder, and so we're going to make leather out of plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well then that's, now we're back to petroleum
Yeah.
and emissions and stuff. It's like, oh no, but we don't want petroleum, we want biofuel. And it's like, okay, now the whole thing is corn, and now our you know, our whole pastures are going to be, our fields, acreage is going to be barren. And then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just like this weird spiraling of all these things that sound really nice until everything is like totally destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you know, you're seeing this like, yeah, there's this interesting synergy of whatever you want to call the new right thing, which is, I've found it like, I'm sure people are so sick and tired of hearing of repeat. Um, but the one thing I'll say
I'm
is just
not.
sort of like, yeah, just like as like an analogy, um, it's funny how Ray Pete sort of also followed a line, this weird new uh synchrony of what, like, in many ways I feel like the evolution of the right is it's kind of bringing like what should have been the best elements of the left and the right together moving forward. And so
Mm-hmm.
where like most nutrition um dogmas or trends or fads tend to be pretty exclusively like uh plant-based
Mm-hmm.
or meat-based. um it's this interesting like, oh, you actually want like to follow up your big fat ribeye steak with like ice cream, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You want your orange juice and you want, you know, your eggs, and it's like this in a weird way, it's just like, yeah, man, it's like before we had all the fads, just how normal people ate. But like,
Yeah.
based on the path of the world, like people are always in these various like reaction cycles, and they're pushing back, and, well, if this is bad, then the opposite of this must be good.
Mm-hmm.
And finding your, like, I actually, I have a tweet in my drafts right now, but it's like basically like, I drink raw milk and Coca-Cola, like, what are you going to do with me, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
It's this weird like, you don't really know where to put um this new kind of cultural swing. It goes across everything. It's like a Kennedy, RFK, you know, anti-vax used to be a very left-wing hippie thing.
Mm-hmm.
Raw milk, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, like the farmers themselves were would be more conservative, but the people who would then go seek it out to buy it,
Mm-hmm.
more of a left-wing hippie thing.
100%.
Um, and but then, okay, but then gasoline and like military, like these are right-wing things.
Yeah.
And it's in a weird way, it's like, oh, this is just how like actual things are supposed to be, without this like fake political cultural division that was like weirdly forcing us to take a stand against something that we never needed to take a stand against.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah. Yeah. Something I've
yeah,
written about that I think is, people talk about the so-called realignment, obviously, and I think that's what you're referring to as
yeah,
well. That RFK is maybe the premier example of. Um, I yeah, like I remember one of my first, maybe 2021 or 2022, something like that. One of the first kind of popular threads that I wrote was just a sort of like line by line response to an article in Jacobin magazine, which obviously is like the communist communism weekly or
I know which
whatever.
article you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and they were just like saying industrial agriculture is good. Like it feeds the world. Like we can't let ourselves be bogged down by these kind of like um, idealistic notions. Like what's really important is feeding the masses, and and obviously that's just very very kind of that's rich, given how much of what we produce doesn't actually become food, as we were just talking about. Um, but
or it becomes food and no one eats it.
becomes
Right.
food. No one eats it. It becomes gasoline. The land itself is not productively managed. It's just a ridiculous argument from every angle. But the point is just like from the sort of old left right thing. I really my main point in that thread was just like this actually makes more sense. Like communism is about large scale industrial, like dehumanized, just producing sort of like lifeless calories for as many people as possible type ideology, and that literally is the form of agriculture that Soviets implemented. And one of their first actions in 1917 was the like Land Reform Act or whatever it was called, where they said this is we're not doing feudalistic agriculture, or even I forget the name of their system that they used to have, but basically where peasants would, every year they would come together and decide how they were going to divvy up like the commons essentially into their like vegetable plots or whatever. Very inefficient system, but like worked for centuries in Russia. And obviously, the failures of the system that they implemented within 10 years had caused enormous famines. But that aside, it really the world that we grew up in with this bizarre like kind of post Cold War amalgamation of ideologies, where like on the one hand the so-called right or the conservatives are like religious and like very pro gun and pro anti-abortion, but like also libertarian economically. I mean, that didn't really make any sense. That's like it's a bizarre combination of values that has no internal coherence. And obviously on the other side as well, where they're like, well, like the left is like Bernie Sanders in terms of its economics, but very open socially, very libertarian socially, anything goes, whether it's sexually.
But then also being like massive pharmaceutical shills, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
how that somehow all lines up was very, very strange.
Yeah.
Bernie just had something in the last couple of days about him saying about how incredible vaccines are, and I guess he's the single greatest recipient of pharmaceutical fund as of like 2020. He was, and it's like, oh yeah, it's funny. Yeah,
that's hilarious. I didn't see that, but yeah, I mean, but yeah, like I think and it's certainly COVID, and I think also Ukraine have just completely broken a lot of historically left-wing people's brains in terms of like, now suddenly I'm sure everybody knows people who have been left-wing their whole lives, or Democrats who are advocating for the war in Ukraine, and who are saying vaccines, the COVID vaccines, were like an altruistic, contribution to the good of humanity by
and that they need to be forced upon the people.
Yeah. And obviously, it's just completely the opposite of what they would have said 20 years ago, or even less, a shorter span of time ago. And so Trump has totally fried these people's brains, which I think is probably ultimately a good thing. But and hope I hope that they they one day recover and become MAGA, which I think a lot of them will actually, especially as MAGA goes beyond Trump. And just this morning, JD Vance had another great interview where he's just very kind of calmly and without the sort of bravado of Trump, very reasonably and calmly kind of asserting the MAGA position. So I'm excited for the future. Obviously, may Trump rule for 100 more years, but the idea of MAGA led by somebody like JD Vance, who can who isn't like as personally, they don't have as much personal ammo against him, and who can arguably articulate this new set of principles as a coherent platform is very exciting. Anyway, the point of I think what we're saying is that the Cold War and post Cold War division of political allegiances was totally made absolutely no sense, was incoherent, and it was inevitable. And like in terms of the results, obviously, you can just see how the system worked and judge it by what it produced. It produced tons of wars. It produced people getting less and less healthy and more fat, and it basically culminated in this like DEI death throes, I think, in the last 15 years, and hopefully that's over. But it seems like it, at least for the foreseeable future, is out of steam, which is great. But yeah, so the fact that like we now, the right, which the sort of Trump MAGA right, which I think in terms of like its abstract principles is is like, kind of believes more, going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of like concrete versus ideals as a way of distinguishing right and left. I think that MAGA actually still is like the concrete version of it, but just in a more sensible way than the right was before. I
Well,
actually think.
you could, if you kind of define like conservatism as the way that it's kind of been, which is just like kind of holding on for dear life in like a
Mhm,
kind of a destined to lose controlled opposition party.
mhm,
They're literally were holding on to every last thing they could hold on to, losing at every step of the way, but holding on to these concrete elements. And but it was like totally defeatist.
mhm,
Whereas what I think Trump does is he flips it and he makes the right ascendant
mhm,
and optimistic and actually going on the offensive.
mhm,
And you have your people like your maybe like a Stephen Miller who's like actually in the administration saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and but then you have the other elements like the left has had for so many years, which is like in various forms foot soldiers, but or like centuries of people. And then you have like a Chris Rufo who is going and getting shit done.
mhm.
There's all of a sudden there's all these people on the right. It's like no, like I want to see this, like either. And the thing is, there's so many of us who we still remember like our childhoods when things weren't like this.
Mhm.
Like it's weirdly enough like I mean, obviously boomers don't need any like more hate than they already get, but you'd think the people who like remember such a like wonderful version of America um would be the ones. But it's like maybe they're just too old and out of energy. But like, I mean, my mom's, I think she's technically older than a boomer, and she's just like, this is not the country that I like remember, like
Mhm.
everything used to work in a certain way and be nice, and everything just kind of functioned in general. But there's something about like, because there's honestly like the young Zoomers, they just don't know. They're born
Yeah.
post 9/11. They've never had not like basically an iPhone in their hands.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's interesting that JD is like the first millennial in place, because goddamn is he's really good. Like a lot of people, I didn't really know much about him. I knew he was like, our guys were kind of like generally for him.
Mhm.
But then you see him on these interviews and on the debate, and you're like, this guy rhetorically runs circles
Yeah.
around these people. And I think I saw these like tweets about like generally liberal women, or like maybe who weren't super like hysterically political. But I'm supposed to not like this guy, but I'm watching him on video, and what is there not to like? He makes total sense.
Yep. Totally. Yeah, I think like, there's such potential, and I was thinking this after Trump won, but before last week, um, that aesthetically the one thing that that they can, I think the one like ammunition that the left media might still have that could like upset people is just like the optics of deportation.
Right.
So like the like like an ice officer like on horseback like rounding up like Haitian people in wherever, and like marching them across the, like obviously that's just going to be like
We
absolute
know
like
we're gonna get that.
fuel.
Like we know that very much.
Yeah. And
Um,
so, but so like
yeah.
if you can like do the deportations and kind of get them out of the way, and I like what people have been, today's Sunday of we're coming up on, today's the seventh day of the regime. They they what I was thinking was that if they can get the deportations, like that kind of optic challenge, out of the way early, once you get past that, like everything else is historically like a centrist, like 60 to 70% majority thing. And deportations are too, by the way, but like, they're just, they can, they can manipulate people's emotions with, like, videos of like families being separated or whatever. Which, who, like, probably fake. But like the point is just that, like, the idea of tariffs, like, I think is just like it's just a boon for the middle class. The idea of like RFK having a referendum on health, like, people may disagree with like RFK on specific things, but in general, I think everybody agrees that it's like a horrible problem how unhealthy the country is. And agriculture falls under that category. So there's some, as I was saying, some hope through RFK that good things may happen. What else? Foreign policy, ending stupid wars, like just like massive, massive majority of people support that. So if those types of things are delivered, and Trump and JD Vance are able to, like, make sure that they're associated with those very centrist, very widely popular measures that under the previous, like, neocon/neoliberal regime, everybody knew that they wanted that, but the regime, like, refused to deliver on those things for its own reasons. There could be like like an actual full political realignment where the opposition is just completely in tatters. It only represents like 20% of the population, and that 20% would be like half, neocon, like never Trumpers, pro-war people, of which there are very few, I think, and then just like race, hucksters. That's like all that's left once if MAGA is able to achieve like those various, broad scale, widely popular political actions. And like I say, the only thing deportations are that are under that category, but just are aesthetically very difficult to pull off without, like, creating a backlash. But it seems like, they're I haven't seen so far huge backlash against it, even though they've already started them. So
Yeah, I
there's a
mean,
lot of cause for optimism.
there was some video going around about this woman who, like, she had her app, whatever that they get. It's crazy that the Biden administration literally made like an illegal immigration app,
Yeah, it's wild.
right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. But like, she was like going through the process and then like it was gone and then she's like all crying and stuff, right? That's like
Right.
the only one I've really seen. And it's interesting the way that you said that. It's like maybe it'd be in the Trump administration's best interest to like almost either let or even like promote one of these like sob stories very soon to almost like get people, just get it out of the way while everyone is still so like amped and excited, or there's so much going on.
Yep.
So that, like by the time that, because what they're going to do is they're going to try to like find the most unique story where someone was like, God, they were like so American, they were so entrenched in America, they were every way American except for a supposed piece of paper. And then somehow the most horrible things were done to like rip their life apart, like this child and this parent and this thing, and they're gonna focus on trying to sniff out like the perfect. They're gonna try to do their like Rosa Parks, right?
Yep,
like
definitely.
They're gonna try to fabricate like, okay, we got to get the right one to put the story on, and this becomes the name will be remembered for decades, kind of a thing.
Yep.
But if you can just exhaust people's like what do pity or concern about that, like from the beginning, with just like, look, this is a real problem, it's really unfortunate what happens to these people, but they shouldn't have been here in the first place, blame the people who brought them over here, we got to take care of our country. That's an interesting way of looking at it. But my concern in general, you were kind of talking about how where everyone might lie after this political realignment, and who will be on either side of it. There's the fight that we have against like the left in all of its forms, which is like both like just like the entrenched liberal establishment, and then there's like the kind of more like progressive far left sort of extreme people. But then there's like and this is kind of going back to like where we are at with the current appointments with in agriculture is like a lot of the people who are, maybe like you want to call them rhino types who go along with MAGA because it's you bend the knee, like you realize that
Mhm.
like if you oppose it, you're screwed.
Mhm.
Like a Lindsey Graham,
Mhm.
um, a lot. I mean, so much of MAGA country is this like major farmland, and those lobbyists are gigantic.
Mhm.
Those are, as big of lobbyists as you're going to find anywhere.
Mhm.
And so a lot of what we want Trump to do, you know, it it might not
Yeah.
be possible without that money and those and that support. And so, just like what the government did for the farmers for decades and decades, which was subsidizing their shift um to grow all this corn and soy,
Yep.
and
Yep.
paying them to like kill off their cattle and stuff. Like
Mhm.
if we know that there are subsidies regardless. People don't want to pay for it, but at least if it's our money, if it's our tax dollars, can we get it to can we get the farmers to like shift towards a more beneficial system for the people, and have the entire ag industry work with a better food system that like isn't fucking killing us and like destroying our soil at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. It's extremely important, I think, to remind everybody of the history of how American agriculture got to where it is. It did not happen naturally. It did not happen organically. No pun intended. Obviously, it didn't happen organically, but um, it the current state is the direct result of not just policy, but like coercion, essentially coercion through policy. Mostly in the 70s. Uh, during the Carter administration, this guy Earl Butz, if you've read Wendell Berry, The Unsettling of America, this is a major theme of that book. But Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture, um, he the famous line was plow fence row to fence row. So just basically devote all of your acreage to grain, annual agriculture. And what most people may not realize, but before that, and I think as in the post World War II era, this trend was already starting. But before that, basically all American farms were diversified in the sense that they were both livestock and crop agriculture. So and they would practice rotation. Sort of obviously with modern technology, but in the same kind of um, coherent tradition of like what you would read about in like middle school social studies with like British rotation techniques, that where they would grow a cash crop one year, they would put it back into pasture, graze it, doing all these kinds of things. If you're familiar with the farmer Gabe Brown out of North Dakota, he's one of kind of the like agriculture influencers to return, to really return to these like integrated systems. And he's like 5,000 acres, huge ranch. Came to like the brink of bankruptcy in the 90s. Had like just couldn't afford pesticides and stuff, and so took like a major risk in what he was growing, and how he was growing it, and just was able to like claw his way into financial success. I highly recommend looking up his book, Dirt to
Is it
Soil, I
dirt
think
to
it's called.
soil? Yeah.
Yeah. If a listener is interested. But the point is just that fertility and these integrated systems, it's those are like sustainable and natural and profitable, and they've been the norm for like all of agricultural history, basically. Integrated farms, diversified farms, more than one thing. Now it's all just corn and soy, and the through economic pressures and through what I would call like coercive incentives over the last 50 years, farmers are in this difficult position. So in order to pull them back out, it's unrealistic to I don't know whether Joel Salatin still says this, but and the fact that he's like maybe he had that weird post that said Thomas Massey was going to be the Secretary of Agriculture, that obviously turned out not to be true. But that was like the day after the election. Everybody was very excited. I was like, this isn't normal that people like he would be announcing this like now. And Massey came out and disavowed it, whatever. But I think he, if RFK was going to get anybody involved, it would probably be him. But I know he's an example of this sort of like old kind of boomer like mentality of like combining this like kind of Christian, very very Christian evangelical thing with like being a libertarian, And so he's like, if I were appointed head of the USDA, I would shut it down on the first day. It's like, well, that wouldn't help farmers, because they're in this position because of the USDA, and the USDA is probably the only entity powerful enough to transition them out of it. So what those incentives would look like, there's a variety of things. I think, I actually think this idea of like soil carbon credits could be a great concept where you're paying farmers to sequester carbon. It obviously it pleases the environmentalist left to some degree. A lot of them don't believe that that's a thing, which I think is silly. But
that's insane that they believe that, though.
That who believes it?
What, that the way that you said the left like doesn't really.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked to some of them about this, and it's just this like quasi religious devotion to like technology. Like it can't be a biological system. It has to be like a reverse smokestack in Iceland where it like prints out like obsidian bricks or something, like where it takes carbon out of the air and like it turns it into like, I don't know, coal or something like that.
It's funny you mentioned that. Like, have you noticed, I just thought it's the first time ever, like the left, quote unquote, whatever you want to call people who just kind of lean that way. It's like they're like they live in this like idealistic like science fair world where like some little girl is gonna invent something in her garage that's just gonna like cure like everything. Like I cured climate change with this, like I combined this like random thing I pulled out of the back of a refrigerator and I could just pull carbon out of the air. It's like it's why they loved like that a little differently. Remember like that guy who like made a clock, and it was like that Arab guy who made a clock, and they said it was like I don't know, an Obama. Do you remember? You know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember that, but I remember. I mean, what's so ironic?
There was this kid, and he like made a clock, but all he did was like he took a clock out of the clock and put it in a briefcase, and then like the school thought it was like a bomb, but it was supposed to be like, oh, this is racial profiling because he's like Muslim or something. And then Obama like tweeted like, hey man, like come to the White House and show me how like you're gonna change our.
I remember that now. Yeah.
It's just like that forever. Like they love that like science fair thing. That's like,
which is so ironic because
I fixed it.
Yeah, that like tinkering spirit, it like is, I think, quintessentially American. And quintessentially agricultural, like making do with the stuff you got lying around, is an amazing spirit. There was a great tweet about like it was like by race, like what do you do when like your suspension is like dangling off the bottom of your car? Like if you're Mexican, you like put a you like put a ratchet strap on it and like wrap it around your whole car. If you're black, you just like wait for it to fall off. And if you're like if you're white American, you have like tools in the back of your car and you pull over to the side of the road and fix it right then and there. Like that kind of, but like that kind of like mentality of fixing things and like like that anecdote. I pulled this out of the back of the refrigerator. It's ironic because like that actually, I think until it still is what farmers do. And there's a great video. I think it's like a Vice News video from maybe 10 or 15 years ago about how farmers, because of the way the tractors are so computerized now, and John Deere, is like, I don't know where this whole situation is now, but I don't have any computerized tractors, but just like cars, they're fully like, you can't fix them without.
You have to go to the dealership. The idea that you could just like work on a car, it's just like gone.
Mhm.
Well,
Exactly.
yeah,
So
okay. Yeah, go
it's the
ahead.
same as with tractors, and so far, like there's this video of, young guys like on like a Dell laptop, like with like wires going into the tractor where they've figured out how to hack it. But it reminds me of another great. There's this awesome this awesome tradition. I think they do it in a lot of places. I forget where I saw this video. It doesn't happen in my neck of the woods, but I think in like Nebraska or something, they have this like ancient tradition, ancient, maybe like 100-year-old tradition, but where it's like the pumpkin launching contest, and basically they these guys build like trebuchets and like air cannons and stuff, where they take a pumpkin, and the contest is to like on launch it has to be intact. Obviously when it lands like a mile away, it splinters into 1,000 pieces.
Sure.
But like these guys, like this sort of engineering attitude of like figuring stuff out, and that's a lot of what's been, I don't think you can fully strip that away, but it's uh, that spirit. And I think kind of like Peter Thiel talks about this when he talks about like how we've reduced innovation to like just software innovation, but there's so many other forms of like science and engineering where there's still a lot of progress to be made, and we've lost a lot of ground to like Russia and Chinese engineers and like things like propulsion and things like that. Obviously Elon Musk is like our one bastion of against that trend. But that kind of mentality, and that's like such a huge part of what made America great and what made American farming the most successful and dominant agricultural producer in the world. Like and so, but it's just funny that the left like hates that. But as you say, they have this dream that like like an immigrant, like sixth grade girl is going to invent the climate change fixing machine.
Well, yeah, and look, I mean, if you try to like make these like broad, um, kind of analyze like what is really going on here, and find these trends and common themes. It's like they take something that is otherwise good, and they just like uh, invert it, or direct it so that it goes to a bad consequence than a good one, right? Like this like innovative industrious spirit is a very like uniquely American thing, and it's a great actual attribute to have.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the things that people are if you it kind of is centered around like what do the people value, what does the culture value, how are we taught to think about things?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you like not to get all like evo psych or anything, but like Robert Sapolsky.
I don't think I do know that.
Okay, he's been on Rogan a few times. He's like a Stanford professor on like evolutionary biology.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the I don't know if he was the first one to do this, but he's the one who's like I can take a DNA test and I can tell you like what your political leanings are,
Mm-hmm.
and how religious you are. And sometimes I wonder, like, how much of these elements, these traits, are just like the exact same one can be basically made it's a direct inverse.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, look at what just happened the day after the inauguration at the Episcopalian Church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, look, you don't need to hear me say this, that like woke, James Lindsay, wokeness is a religion. Like we've
Mm-hmm.
that's been done to death. But someone who is extremely like like essentially a religious fanatic, and kind of forces everything to conform to this like very kind of strict structure. But if you just invert the entire value system, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I wonder how much of what we are seeing across the board in every political sphere, every cultural sphere, are people who are wired like genetically or whatever you want to call it to be a certain way, and then because of what they're either raised with or taught to think or propagandize, that gets directed, like it's the reason why people who often like who are on one political extreme have oftentimes also been on the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
how someone goes from a vegan to a carnivore, someone
Yeah.
goes from like a Nazi to a communist, or whatever you want to call it. Like
Yeah. There's a
there's
tendency towards like extremism or like edginess or
yeah,
radicalism.
there's just any kind. I mean, that even that's like an oversimplification. There's just any kind of like trait tree of like, here are all
Mhm.
these elements that are basically like who you are and how you're going to be, but where that's going to go and what that's going to support could be like entirely different based on um, just your surroundings.
Mhm.
And so it's not like there's the idea that like, okay, a lot of um, really like what who should would otherwise be like foot soldiers for um, the right are foot soldiers for the left, just because like their wiring is to be foot soldiers. It's like, tell me what flag am I carrying, and I'm gonna like go make that reality, right? And so
Mhm.
I feel like there's a lot of these elements that, I mean, that they're not bad on themselves. Like, yes, we want people to like do these amazing technological innovations. We need the natural element, we need the technology element. Like, this is part of the human condition, is like where we fall in between gods and animals. We kind of have to make peace with that fact that like we kind of fit into our own little category.
Mhm.
So not like a full like anarcho primitivist, like, we love our Uncle Ted, but like, unless you're going to actually eradicate all technology from the planet, we kind of have to work with it. And but then like, you get in this like overly like everything has to be the most technical, advanced, almost like simplified solution. Like, why don't we just like change the systems? It's like, no, all we're going to do is we're just going to flip a switch and everything is going to be solved now. Like, it's a
Mhm.
very much this interesting like, going back to the religious element, like a savior complex. Like, one person is going to like fix it,
Mhm.
whatever it is.
Mhm. Yeah, it reminds me of Alan Savory, and very like obviously kind of discovered him and planned grazing. For those who don't know, he was Rhodesian. He's a rancher, living in what is now Zimbabwe, who was an ecologist, and discovered. Uh, I think still a very controversial idea, or developed this controversial idea that the cause of desertification in Zimbabwe and other not just African but any any bioregion where rainfall is seasonal, where desertification tends to accelerate. He hypothesized that this is happening because of too few animals rather than too many, and most the sort of logic of like, well, there's too many animals, they're eating the grass, the grass is being overgrazed, therefore we should reduce the number of animals on the land. He said no, it's the opposite. There's not enough animals to stimulate the animal impact, and the pattern of the animal impact stimulates grass growth, um, and therefore prevents and reverses desertification, not the other way around. That's just an introduction to who he is. He's still alive. But one of the very kind of like basic but revolutionary ideas that he instilled in my mind was this idea of livestock themselves and fire itself as technologies. Obviously, I think it's not controversial that fire is kind of a technology or a tool for humans to use. But this idea of livestock as a tool for land management, it really, what that really did in my mind was it, you know, as the sort of environmentalists were saying that, starting in the kind of 2010 sometime, saying that cows are bad. Not only do they cause desertification, they take up all the water and they produce methane, which contributes, which is a greenhouse gas, whatever. It really shifted my perspective in the sense that made me realize that like nothing is good or bad. Nothing that exists in nature is like has, as I think as you were talking about, has like an inherent you know um, an inherent moral like valence. I think that what makes tools good or bad is how they are used. And so, mismanaged livestock obviously are bad, but well managed livestock are good, and they have different degrees of like power and capacity. And so like a very large herd of cows mismanaged could turn even like a somewhere where it rains regularly into like a desertified landscape, or at least a much less productive landscape. That's what has happened across much of North America. But well managed, you could really actually regenerate that piece of land. So I think, yeah, it's about letting go of of that like need. I think, as you were alluding to, for like a moral understanding of not just of these almost like, I don't want to say, obviously not inanimate objects, but like of whether or not, whether this is good or this is bad. Like everything needs to be, there's sort of this impulse, I think, in modern people to categorize things morally, which is funny, because we think of ourselves as like atheistic, or like a less religious in a less religious era. But there's more need than ever to put things, or at least an equal need, I think, to the past, to say, oh, this is bad, this is good, when in fact it's never been one or the other. It's always determined by how human beings are putting it to use. So um,
Yeah, well, I mean, it is funny, like what people call technology.
mhm,
Um, Technology. It seems like technology has to include electricity.
mhm,
Um, it has to be like, yeah, it has to have like software, at least now, the way like the tech world is, so to speak.
yeah,
Um, but I mean, that comes back to like just the human thing is like basically, well, animals use tools too, I mean, um, but fire, all of these, everything that is technological is natural in origin, in the sense that there's no such thing that exists that doesn't have some origin in uh, natural elements, because how else could you create it and use it if it didn't exist?
mhm,
Um, uh, and so, if you think about like rotational grazing, at least the way that it's always kind of like sold is like, in nature, the animals move due to pressure from predators. Oh,
mhm,
they've grazed the grass here. Now it's time to move on to um, the next fresh
mhm,
patch to go on to, and so they will on their own do that. And so basically, what we're doing is, once humans came along, we kind of like made in a way the world like unnatural. Um, it's some, at least like we have the ability to, if you
yeah,
want to look at it that way. And so
yep,
it's like, how do we then bring back the nature with our own intervention? And so it's so stupid when people use like as a criticism, like, oh well, this is just a man-made such and such. It's like,
mhm,
what argument are you even trying to make here? Like, all of our words are man-made, so you can't make
mhm,
an argument without using something man-made. What's the point of this?
yep,
Um, and like earlier we were talking about like capturing sunlight, and how when we made solar panels, we basically tried to like replicate what leaves are, right? Like we're
mhm,
taking real things in nature that are as natural as could possibly be, like in any sort of definition. And
mhm,
then when we do our technology, we're basically, nature gave us the blueprint.
mhm,
And so we look to that to find our solutions. And so it's like, how do we use technological advancement to go with nature as much as possible? So yeah, if we're talking about an integrated food system, how can we find a way that is the what is essentially the healthiest for the animals, will kind of would, in a sense, be what's most natural. Which is, it's so weird how like chickens especially, but I guess also pigs, they'd be advertised like your eggs like as a all vegetarian feed. Well, anyone that's raised chickens knows that chickens aren't vegetarians.
mhm.
And
Yeah, that's funny.
so, what we always did was, um, when we would ever do a slaughter, um, the guts, you just dump the guts into the pig pen, and the pigs would just tear apart all the cow and lamb guts, and
Mhm.
then the chickens would pick through it, and before you know it, like, it would just be gone.
Yeah,
um I mean, I've seen like a pig skull absolutely picked clean by chickens, just like
yeah,
as clean as can be.
yep,
um and so, yeah, like it seems like our food systems, our political systems, our technological systems, our cultural, everything sort of has to like flow with the laws of nature. And as we try to deviate from that too far and try to get into this, like, I guess maybe that's what I was getting at with this, like, weird, like, over technological reliant solution, is that you have to, it has to be a system wide solution. And so let's think about what the first thing we talked about, right? Like the DI being like this not concrete thing that might have been embedded in the system, but it had no actual like bearing on anything, because you just remove it and then you realize that it actually wasn't. If you can remove something like that whole cloth and nothing bad happens, you can. It's very evident that it's like not actually real or important. But the food system can't be solved that easily. So we have to talk about like all of these widespread solutions. Local farms, bigger farms, industrial size like farms. Like, how are we actually going to do this in a way? And then think about the way the whole economy is set up. That people need to eat. That people need to be able to afford the food. It's a very, very complex issue. And it requires every layer of it being looked at, and not just being, how do you want to call it, just kind of like cherry pick, to just be like, oh well, we want this and we want that and we want that and we want this, and it's like, no, this has to work in order for this to work, this has to work in order for that to work. And what I wonder is like, okay, it's very clear that we're not happy with these ag appointments. First off, like, how can we, I feel like at this point, like, there's the ecosystem is already set up in such a way that like we can express our dissatisfaction with this, and kind of get that up to like where it's known by Trump, it's known by the probably the loudest political mouthpieces, whether that be like a Tucker Carlson or maybe more like the Twitter sphere. But obviously we've seen from the election that the Twitter sphere is very influential. So one is making it clear that we're not happy with this. We don't want the seed oil shills. We don't want these like, horrifying factory farm pork shills. But then like, who do we get kind of in place here that can actually move the needle in a better direction?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think unlike with DEI, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, but unlike with say the DEI reversals, the people who the complexity of the situation is in part owing to the fact that the people who are like at risk here, i.e., the farmers and other people involved in the agricultural industry, are like on our side, So whereas like if every DEI employee is fired, then like that's great. Like we don't like we're happy about that because they're not politically on our side. So the delicate aspect of the process is just, and I view is making sure that farmers like, if you want to enact a transition and make agriculture better in various ways, whether from an animal welfare perspective, a health perspective, an environmental perspective, like farmers, people should understand, and I was talking about this before, like I've already been taken for a ride over the last 50 to 75 years. And like they're surviving, but I like it's become, agriculture has become very much a tool of kind of like the American state in various ways, and the welfare of farmers as business people and just as human beings, I think, has been like kind of has fallen by the wayside in that calculus. So I think, and Trump did in his first term did a lot to obviously tariffs are bad for farmers because farmers are exporting a lot of, and so that causes the price to go up, and in some cases for countries that are importing our agricultural goods to maybe get them elsewhere. So that's bad. Those types of things are bad for farmers. But Trump, during the trade war with China, I think he was actually making just like cash payments to farmers or something like that. So obviously like a very traditional Republican measure like that. But I bring all this up to just say that essentially what you would ultimately need is some kind of like transition program that like floats whatever it is, because whether you're saying we're going to, rather than we're going to like subsidize, we're going to, in order to keep the cost of pork the same, we're going to subsidize pork, but we're going to subsidize it so that pigs can be raised like without confinement, without like extreme confinement like we saw in that picture. Okay, like there's just going to be a cost to that on one end or the other. So I personally think that yes, the U.S. government should pay that cost. Obviously, that's just taxpayer money that would be going to that. But because taxpayer money was used to kind of get farmers into this position in the first place, that's the only way to get them back out. And so and I think various other measures. I think that obviously some, from a grain production perspective, getting guys who have done it, like Gabe Brown, and from livestock perspective, guys like Greg Judy, based out of Missouri. He's another great grazier with a lot.
By the way, I have a quick Greg Judy thing I was thinking about earlier is how another guy who's like a MacGyver, right? Like we're talking about these, like the farmers are like the true inventors, because it's like when you're out there in the field and you're doing all this kind of like just backbreaking labor and stuff, you're like, how can I make my life easier? And you find all these little things. And so Greg Judy's got all these kind of inventions with like, laying fence and building fence, all that kind of stuff. But, it's how different the different ecosystems are in the United States for farming, and how, water, like you're saying, in some climates, water, it rains year round, and in some climates it only rains seasonally. And, in Colorado, which is very dry during the summer, and the fall, one of the farms I worked on, the owner, who was not very competent, he went to a seminar, a Greg Judy seminar, and about like grazing strategies and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if getting your advice from a guy who has more rain than he knows what to do with, in his part, is like, maybe not the best thing to do. Maybe kind of, because like our biggest issue was always like water.
Yeah.
Our biggest issue was always water. And yeah. So, you have to go with nature. Like you have to understand what you're working with to figure out the solution.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Yeah. Principles, like overarching principles, only get you so far in farming. I think there are very few that apply everywhere. And it's not just about location. Obviously that's a big factor, but everybody's context is very different. And this is something that Alan Savory like very emphasizes, very strongly, just that it's all about context. And that includes not only, your rainfall, but it includes, what your farm is trying to do. I think Joel Salatin, while he's highly inspirational to a lot of people, it's highly unreasonable to expect that, for one thing, like your average American farmer is going to become like a salesman like him. I mean, obviously he's incredibly innovative and came up with these amazing systems, but really the reason that he's as famous as he is because of what an incredible salesman he is, and just like his storytelling ability, his personality. I think that's even more so than his innovation, because Greg Judy's very innovative too, as you were just saying. Gabe Brown is very innovative too, but they have
a celebrity farmer kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, those two guys, and taking nothing away from the Salatin family. Like obviously, the point is, Joe, though, just that like they've created a niche that plays to their strengths, and there's a reason that like farmers, that like the typical like sales strategy for farmers, at least livestock farmers, is auctions. It's just like the simplest, easiest, lowest cost way to get rid of your wares at the highest price, the highest possible price. I mean, farmers do not want to be like being a Joel Salatin. I think that's so Joel Salatin has great insights on agriculture in general, and especially integrated, diversified agriculture. But in terms of guys that I would want to, I think going back to your original question, guys that I would want to be advising, to be figuring out how to get more land managers to adopt their techniques. It would be Greg Judy and for livestock, and Gabe Brown for crops, and also integrated systems, but broadacre crops and livestock. But again, those two guys are like pioneers, and they like roughed it incredibly hard for a very long time, and now they're both like probably over 60 and enjoying like a low level celebrity status within that space. But for people who aren't in that category, I think you will have to incentivize them somehow. And as we keep saying, the system that exists now is what it is because it was incentivized. So the difficulty is just that it's more expensive to build a good system than it is to fritter away the value that had accumulated from a pre-existing good system, which is what we've been doing. We've been eating the seed corn, and now we need to like build the seed bank back up, and that's just more expensive. And so I think either way, whether it's through taxpayer dollars or through food prices, the kind of a difficult reality is just that there's like going to be a cost associated with turning these things around.
Yeah. It's interesting how because I saw Anna's tweet too, that it was we need like the Rufo kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different problem that requires a different solution. And so it's not going to be so much that like there's a Rufo, but if you remember, the story basically goes that Trump was watching Fox News when Rufo was on Tucker, Hannity or something, and
Right.
he was saying critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
And then it basically got in. I mean, like, we're online, we already knew these things, but like it got into the public consciousness. And Trump is very much like, people call Trump a man of the people. Trump is like the people. He's a guy who like, is going to sit there and watch Fox News just like all of our boomer parents do.
Yep.
And so getting this, no one is thinking about this for the most part. Like so many people are just like, just make my life better. Because COVID was at everyone's like forefront, then health and vaccines became, top of mind. And of course, then obviously everyone like has their inhibits their body. And so then they're like, oh, I'm not healthy. I feel like there's something wrong. Oh, then we all eat food. Okay. But not everyone really understands like connection between the food and like where it comes from.
Yeah.
And so finding some way to get this more into the public consciousness is going to be really important. And so, it might not look like a Rufo, but, I wonder like if the MAHA thing that exists is close, remember how Trump was like, don't touch my oil,
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if like this message can get to Trump that it's not like we're trying to go from oil to these like, weird renewables, but we're trying to like improve our farming system.
Yeah.
That, that gets us, obviously Trump is not, you could, he's got to be a fan of meat if he's eating McDonald's and stuff, right?
Yeah.
If we're like, hey man, we need more cows.
Yeah.
We want our systems to work better, that our, cows can graze more. This will be better. Like, I wonder how we can kind of get like some kind of big exposure, get like a little round table of, the Salatin and the Judys and the Gabe Browns and, getting those kinds of people to sort of advise this like agricultural reshaping. But I mean, it really requires like a strong knowledge and connection to like how the system is already in place.
Yeah.
And like what you're saying, like what has already been done for decades to these farmers, because they basically did what what the government told them to do, that they would make more money.
Yep.
And look, it's not that, I mean, we love our farmers. Some farmers can certainly be greedy and have bad business practices, just like anyone else can. Um, so if you're going to shift the entire industry that way, it needs a lot of pressure and a lot of support to like get people to buy in.
Mhm.
Um, or, you know, you're just not going to be able to get people to go along with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think if you think about like what's preventing, a successful grain producer, corn producer from transitioning back to like it's not like these guys are like hate hate like the environment or anything like anything like that. It's I think a lot of people would, a lot of producers would prefer to do things in a more like what would be considered idealistic way. Uh, it's just not realistic on that scale, and given but specifically given like just the investment into the systems that they have set up in terms of grain agriculture. That's equipment. There's just an enormous capital is sunk into equipment, and it's all obviously financed with debt. And so it's like not that it's not that simple without a big like a big intervention. To there's like and the equivalent in animal agriculture, at least confined operations, so um finishing lots for cattle, but then just hog barns and chicken facilities. It's just the built environment, the barns. There's just an enormous amount of borrowed money that's invested into those things, and you have to make you're paying it back like a mortgage. And you don't have like the option just to buy yourself out of that. There's no other way to do it than to keep doing it. And if things somehow go south in your operation, that's why there's crop insurance. So that it props up the whole system. Like this very unnatural system that has no kind of inherent advantage. It has like political advantages, like that we talked about at the beginning. It keeps food prices low, and it gives us leverage over international competitors. But from an American health perspective and from a farmer prosperity perspective, there's no inherent advantage, and it's certainly not a farmer independence perspective. I mean, you think about the sort of debt slavery that they're in, that I just described. It's not an enviable position. So how to get out of that? You need some kind of like, people like, it's a very mainstream idea, the idea of student debt forgiveness. But somebody's left holding the bag, no matter what. In that kind of scenario. So somebody needs to uh, somebody needs to get paid. But yeah, I do think probably in Trump's mind, it is like hippy dippy idealistic stuff that RFK represents. And look, to some degree, that's not wrong.
Yeah.
um, but in terms of agriculture, I don't mean to be making more of a broader statement than that. But and so yes, like just showing. I think something that I've tried to do in terms of my like agricultural commentary over the last 5 or so years on Twitter is just show how much better it could be. This could be like, we don't. There's always this argument about, well, it's less efficient, it's less productive, and people are thinking of like going from California, like broccoli production, where it's like 500 acres of broccoli or whatever, and there's like 5 feet between each broccoli plant. um, but it's being harvested by like a broccoli specific tractor implement that can only harvest broccoli. um, like and the economics work out such that on a labor basis that's more efficient, um, versus like an intensive organic, like market garden or whatever. Like, yes, on a labor basis it is less efficient, it is going to be more expensive in the grocery store or at the point of sale. But and so I don't argue against that from like like a vegetable farm perspective. And I think a lot of organic vegetable producers are kind of, well, I won't even go into that actually. But like my vision from a kind of livestock perspective is like large scale. I don't have like a fetish for like the small scale. I think, a 10,000 head herd of jerseys with 1,000 cowboys and milkmaids in going back and forth to the milking barns twice a day, and having like the technology and the like innovative like forms of new infrastructure to make that system possible and efficient are, like, I think that's like what I envision, and like a prosperous rural economy built around that sort of thing. I have no great love of like, I think that small scale, the benefit of smallness is that when all you have is like a quarter acre or something, you are forced to you're forced to use it extremely efficiently. And that's kind of what, like, permaculture or whatever I think originally was about, was, figuring out all of the different multi-storied ways you can harvest a yield off of, like, a square meter. If you think about it, how are you going to maximize calorie production from a square foot, and from a single person managing that square foot? Obviously, it's an extreme example, but that's like a good kind of thought experiment. Or even, if you're talking, maybe if you have like a backyard, like a tenth of an acre or something, something kind of manageable for one person to convert into food production. You're not gonna put like a dairy cow on a tenth of an acre. Just from a logistical perspective, it's not going to work. But maybe you would do something more intensive, and you have to figure out in your context what that would look like. But that to me is really the only like inherent benefit of small scale. And there's nothing, and like large scale, obviously it has like the obvious benefit of just like more. It produces more, but like it's the same thing. Like it's similar to what we were saying about tools and like moral valence. Like large and small, like do not equal good and bad. Like they're not. They're
Right.
both neutral. They both have like pros and cons. And but that, I think, like, from the sort of the like regenerative agriculture movement, and I try and push people away from the idea of like small equals good. And obviously on the other side of it, on the industrial side, there's, I don't know whether they've moralized it, but certainly like it's get bigger, get out, is the name of the game. And that's been what is, this sort of consolidation effect in agriculture has been happening for since that fence row to fence row Earl Butz phenomenon of, that obviously incentivizes consolidation, because it's about spreading the cost over spreading as much cost as possible over the same pieces of like fixed infrastructure.
Um, so you're like, what you're saying right now, it's okay. Small is nice if it's like, what's available to you, but it's probably not like the greatest solution on the grand scheme of things. Your experience with farming, I know, like, for myself, I had no experience whatsoever. And so when anyone asked me how I got into farming, I literally moved to a town where there were farms, and I started calling around asking for jobs, until someone hired me so I could start to just literally learn. Like, the first time I ever, drove a tractor, or, slaughtered an animal or milked a cow, like, it all happened after I did that. But for you, how did you get started? Like, did you grow up on a family farm? Like, what was your sort of entry into the farm life?
Yes. How did I get started? I did grow up on a farm. It wasn't really like a commercial venture when I was growing up, but I kind of reinvigorated it a little bit during college, and then after college, started it as a full time business. So yeah, um, we had sheep and pigs and chickens and stuff growing up, but it was definitely more small scale. more like a homestead, really. And my parents were kind of just doing it for fun. And yeah, I just grew up with that and always loved it. And in college and high school, really got happened to learn more about. I wasn't like planning on becoming a farmer or anything, but happened to learn more about regenerative agriculture and became a little obsessed with it. You know, as a teenager, and by the time I was in college, I didn't really think my parents would allow me to, but they were really um, encouraging with just letting me ultimately build out the build out the systems however I wanted. And so yeah, that's kind of it's kind of the background.
So you pretty much just like took it upon yourself to take your family's little homestead to like a proper functioning farm business.
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's possible to start small, clearly, and then kind of grow into something that's actually more substantial. And
Mhm.
I think our solution is going to be such that we kind of have all of these options available. So if people want to um, um, do it on their own, they have the ability to do that. And if we want to be changing the systems as a whole, like we can do that. And I think like if the systems, there's always an incentive to every market. And so if people are saying, hey, at least the people who can afford to go, I don't like the quality that's available to me in the stores. I don't like the quality that's available to me through all of the normal systems that we're used to having. Then I'm going to go seek these out at these more like boutique style farms. And then at some point, those farmers either are going to be then incentivized to make changes, or get the quality up such that the clientele that they're losing their business to. Because look, I mean, like it's unless you are growing and raising your own food, like you have to buy it from somewhere.
Mhm.
And so I know so many people now who, they get their basics from the grocery store, but they buy all of their meat from cow shares or, some type of local farm or some kind of delivery thing.
Mhm.
Um, and so it seems like, as the culture is sort of shifting greatly as far as what the people are interested in, um, yeah, the farms are going to have to adapt, and then hopefully like but okay, so like, okay, trying to connect this to like, again, back to what's practical. Trump clearly showed that at least as far as like the border and deportations go, you can just start doing things. Like there was already this, where there's a will there's a way. This
You
has
can just
been
do
like
things.
the You can just do things.
Yeah.
This has been the major focus of basically the last 4 years of what the people are upset about and want change. And so like that, I mean, in many ways, the Trump campaign was like mostly centered around mass deportations because of all of the downstream effects that you have from there. And so all that needs to happen really is uh, a similar focus. I mean, obviously, like it's hard to get everyone all on the same thing as such. Like that's the thing that's so important about the immigration and the border, is that we're talking about food prices.
Mhm.
Well, if you bring down inflation,
Mhm.
um, well, all of a sudden everything is a lot cheaper than it used to be. There's a lot less people competing for housing, which frees up money. There's a lot less people buying their goods, so then the demand goes down. And so I really think like, because this is what we want to see. This is what a lot of people want to see who did vote for Trump. That it's going to be this like, how can the the customers, so to speak, or the people who want this from the Trump administration, find a meeting with the farmers who likely voted for Trump,
Mhm.
and the lobbyists, and trying to get us to like at least like start the motion, right? Like all these other issues that have been in the public sphere for people who are like Trump supporters,
Mhm.
we're starting to see like the wheels are turning, and that's why everyone's really happy.
Mhm.
And so I feel like this is one of those things that probably fell like out of public, focus, because the health conversation was more of vaccines, but it is on the food system, and it somehow kind of hasn't. Maybe it's just because of the involvement of the farmers that it hasn't quite bridged the gap into um, as much of a awareness. Because like again, going back to like Trump found out about, or a lot of people found out about the DEI stuff through watching Fox News. Like, did you ever watch the Sacred Cow documentary that came out 2 years ago?
I think I did watch that one, but remind me of the. Is that like a vegan one?
No, no, no. Sacred Cow was they did a book first, and then they did a documentary. It was Diane Rogers and Rob Wolf. Rob Wolf was like a big paleo guy, if you know him.
Hmm.
Um,
Cowspiracy, that was the vegan one.
Yeah, the Cowspiracy is the vegan one. And so they wrote a book called Sacred Cow. I have it somewhere.
Hmm.
And then the documentary is actually, I see it right now. It's on YouTube, so you can watch it.
Hmm.
Um, they finally put it on YouTube, I think, like about a year ago. And it's basically like a regenerative agriculture documentary.
Hmm.
And I mean, I was very aware of it because, well, for one, I know Rob personally from like my CrossFit World days, because he was like he wrote like a bunch of paleo books, like New York Times bestseller books, and he was at one point the kind of like nutrition guru for the CrossFit paleo world.
Hmm.
And then as the carnivore diet got very popular, kind of really hit the sort of like peak in 2020, which really coincided with all the COVID stuff, and then all of a sudden all of these health issues are at the forefront. um, they did this regenerative agriculture documentary. Diane Rogers, I believe she's a farmer herself,
Yeah,
and
I think
maybe a
that seems right.
journalist. um, I'm not exactly sure of her. She's a dietitian, and I think she has like a family farm. Um, and so that was in my uh, like awareness, because I mean that's like basically the entire world that I inhabited.
Hmm.
But I haven't seen it. The vegan things really hit. Like the vegan documentary gets on Netflix, and it's a very big cultural thing. I think that they were trying to get this documentary on Netflix, and so this already exists. Maybe we find a way to like popularize this. Maybe it requires to do um, more filming, more video content. It doesn't have to be this just giant documentary, but it needs to like get into the sphere of awareness for like a lot of people who are MAGA people, Trump supporters. Because it's interesting that what the carnivore diet did more than anything, forget the actual carnivore diet itself,
Hmm.
it kind of just made everyone be like, meat's not bad for you, meat's good for you, which was
Yeah,
such an incredible win. Like
yeah,
that's a generational win with what we've had for what all of our parents grew up in. Cholesterol is going to kill you.
yeah.
um and it seems like that is the meat. And and look how raw milk, all MAGA people are very raw, like pro raw milk. Like I remember you know RIP Corey Comparator, the firefighter who died
Hmm.
in Butler, who got
Yeah, yeah,
shot.
yeah. Yeah, I remember his
um
tweets about raw milk. Yeah.
yeah, he was a raw milk guy, and like there's a good chance that a lot of these MAGA supporters got into raw milk because raw milk got memed um, through MAGA.
Yeah.
And so we understand the power of memes. The regenerative agriculture thing kind of has to break through into that kind of like next level to, I think, really get the broad appeal. Because
Yeah.
all the people maybe like in our circles who are a lot more like into the more special minutia type stuff, like we all know about it.
Hmm.
um but until it gets in, because like I only saw basically people being upset about this appointment from like a relatively small Twitter sphere.
Yeah.
You did not see Fox News being like, "Oh shit, look at this terrible appointment."
Definitely not. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it's just like it's just business as usual. I think from the USDA perspective. And like that's fine. I think and business as usual is just like things getting progressively worse, uh, uh, squeezing more more pigs into one barn, more dollars out of the the sunk costs. I think like one thing that I've been thinking as you were just talking is like Trump loving McDonald's. And I remember there being maybe 10 or 15 years ago now, like a Joel Salatin blog post that caused a lot of like, heated debate on like farmer forums and stuff that I was on, uh, about, I think Salatin, I don't want to like misquote him, but it might have been like the opposite of what I'm saying, but I think he basically said like, if McDonald's came to us and said, we want all of our beef to be polyface beef, like we'll do a deal with you where like we make that happen, that he wouldn't accept the deal because he didn't believe like in McDonald's ideologically, like. And I like maybe agreed with him at that point when I was a lot younger, but I think like if McDonald's put out like, imagine if McDonald's, in addition to its existing menu, just like through its own, could use its own certifying process, but like created a menu offering that would, they could price it however they want. Maybe it's like a $20 burger or something, but it's like it's like a health burger. It's like it's the kind of burger that like we would wish the typical quarter pounder was. And who knows how much that would cost McDonald's, the like the best like like most efficient scaled restaurant chain in the world. They could probably produce something like that for like not that, like something in the teens, like a burger with like a good, like a non-seed oil bun, a bun made out of actual bread, just because that like a gourmet restaurant produces that kind of thing for, in my area, like, I don't know, $25 or something. A much larger scale, much more efficient operation could probably do it for less than that. So I think like doing something like that, I think any resistance to something like that is crazy, just because like it is about what you're saying. It's about like that visibility and the accessibility, and like obviously a lot of people would balk at the price, and that's like the problem right now. But just to show that like such a thing is possible, I think people have the impression that like the systems are just like incompatible, and to some degree that's probably right. Like you're not, in terms of just scale, but also like logistics and other, like here's an example that illustrates the point. Like we have, we have a lot of chef partners, but we've struggled to sell to some chefs, especially more like kind of not necessarily fine dining, but like kind of more like corporate type places, like country clubs and stuff like that, that do a lot of like, more like catering and things, because they need everything to look exactly the same. They need like all the pork chops to be the exact same size, and like in a given week we may be slaughtering a hog that dresses out at like 200 pounds and another one that dresses out at like 275. So like one slightly under what you want and one slightly over, and that's just like the way it goes. And their pork chops are going to be slightly different size. And so there are places that just won't buy them for that reason. And so there are like difficulties like that. But an operation like Polyface, or like Greg Judy's operation or something like that, that takes that like managerial ability and plugs it into, like I think like I forget whether this is still happening, but I think that on just like a local level, Polyface was selling pork to like the Charlottesville Chipotle, and they were,
Well,
it was
okay.
like, yeah,
That's, I was going to say that I know that Salatin was supplying pork to Chipotle, and it's like, okay, so if you can give pork to Chipotle, why can't you give beef to McDonald's?
yeah. I think it was just about like the fact that Chipotle, and I think that relationship ended for some reason with Chipotle and Polyface, but I think that the way like Chipotle had some, I think it ended because of that. There was some kind of E. coli something at Chipotle, and they like they like centralized their processing, I think, or something like that. But if I recall, that was the reason. But like Chipotle had the ability, I think, in its excuse me, in its earlier
Bless you.
days. Thank you. To actually like be supplied locally in that way. I don't think McDonald's has that. Like you would have to, or at least it would have to be like a whole region would be supplied by like, you know, a single producer type thing or something like that. Like otherwise your beef would just be getting ground into like all the other beef, you know, at the like centralized McDonald's patty,
Right.
frozen patty production facility.
Well, I mean, look, but you know what we've already seen, and this is not a political thing whatsoever. This is a purely cultural shift. How many restaurants are going seed oil free?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yep.
they know that people are looking for it specifically, and so either they can advertise themselves that, which like, I mean, I'll be honest, there are restaurants which I've literally only gone to because it's like, oh, they're seed oil free.
Yep.
Let's go check it out. Like that
Yep.
doesn't mean that the food is going to be good, but if I hear that, I go, I mean, and I'm not even thinking about this. What I'm in effect doing is I'm rewarding them for
Mm-hmm.
doing that. At the very least, giving them a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, like a Steak and Shake, you know, which is like a fast food chain,
Yeah.
just went seed oil free. They're going
Yeah.
tallow.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
and
it's definitely possible. Like in terms of cost, like I mean, you know, like it's taking nothing away from like the difficulty of the business model. Like it's a very competitive and very like razor thin margin business. And so, but yeah, I do think like um, the difference in cost between tallow and you know, seed oils are definitely a lot cheaper, but like it does end up being like the kind of cost where it's like pennies that you could probably pass along to the consumer on like a unit basis of like the French fry cost. You know, and I actually I learned this I think maybe in an article after Trump did that McDonald's work shift thing in back in September or whatever.
right.
I didn't know this, but I guess they add like, you know, like beef bouillon, like, or some like, you know, beef essence thing to the seed oils at McDonald's, so that the fries still taste like vaguely beefy or something.
So I thought that they actually stopped doing that
Mhm.
because they had a lawsuit from like some big Hindu
Oh, really?
organization
Yeah.
that wanted the French fries to be vegetarian.
Uh-huh.
And so I literally just looked this up the other day because I think I was trying to do some kind of like some like Indian dunk with seed oils or French fry. I forget exactly what it was. And because I knew I'd heard about it, I knew that there was a connection. I looked it up, and I guess when they switched from tallow to, you know, soybean oil, whatever, um, they they continued to add some sort of tallow essence.
Mhm. Right.
Um, and then they got a huge lawsuit from some massive Hindu organization, and they basically had to give a bunch of money to like organizations, which I don't know how that like makes
Crazy.
it better. But you know, everything is a scam, like always. Um, and so my understanding was I like that they stopped using that um, because of that, so that they could then say our French fries are fully vegetarian. So if you're vegetarian, you can come to McDonald's and get, I don't know what you eat if you're a vegetarian at McDonald's. You could get like apple slices and French fries or something. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I wonder, do they still do that? Um, use what do they call it? Beef essence? I don't know.
Yeah.
They
I've got
still
about
use
10
beef
minutes, by the way.
flavoring. Oh,
Yeah.
10 minutes. Okay. Well, I think we're about wrapping up.
Okay, cool.
Okay, they add flavoring. I don't know. Add beef flavoring to oil blend. The flavoring is made from hydrolyzed wheat and hydrolyzed milk. Okay. So there is no beef in it.
Yeah. That's funny that
It's a vegetarian
it's a
substance.
vegetarian beef essence. They like isolated the like the uh flavor signal molecule
The
for that it
particles.
hits your tongue. Yeah, and you think it's beef, but it's actually just wheat and and milk.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, that probably wraps it up. I mean, we talked about all kinds of good stuff. We got into a lot of info. We got into a lot of maybe some solutions moving forward. So, William, thank you so much for your time. It was great getting to catch up with you. Um, and yeah, are you working on anything that the interwebs would like to know about?
Um, just plugging away. No huge projects, but continuing to commentate and yeah, hopefully. I mean, I would love if anyone in the administration is listening. I know some people, but not in the agriculture side. But if people are interested in this, and I think the way to do it is through what we've been talking about. The way to enact a transition to the extent that it can be enacted just organically through like market forces. Yeah, stuff like the seed oil awareness campaign and the impact that we're seeing from that is awesome. But partnering with businesses, with big businesses to create these alternative options and create awareness about the possibility that our food system and our agriculture system could be different and could be better than it is. I'm excited about piloting those kinds of programs and have more ideas about them. So I'd be interested in talking to anyone who's interested or thinking about those kinds of things. So yeah, but yeah, no huge projects, but looking forward to interacting with everyone on the timeline.
Yeah, I'll tell you more about this later, but I'm trying to see what I can do. MAHA involvement. Been talking to some people, and so if I get in there in some capacity, I'm definitely going to be bringing up agriculture type stuff, and
Yep.
um, we'll see if I can loop you in as well too. But just crossing our fingers for that. And what's your Twitter handle? Plowman's
Plowman's
Folly.
Folly, yeah. Ploughmansfolly.
All right. Well, we'll see you. We'll see you posting away on the timeline. And William, thank you again so much for coming by.
Thanks, Josh. It was great. Great
All
to
right,
talk.
man. Bye, everybody.